I just ate a bit of lunch and I was thinking about synesthesia, where the brain gives the sensation that isn't correct. For example, someone might be eating a carrot and it tastes like cotton candy. And I have this sense that synesthesia has something to do with the fact that we're all one consciousness. So sometimes we have that sort of experience that's not congruent. And I was thinking about how when I've had an experience called dissociation in the past, I feel like I'm a homeless man. And I was thinking that that's actually, in a way, related to synesthesia. It's like experiencing a different consciousness as my own, not just thinking I'm eating cotton candy when I'm eating a carrot. It's actually feeling like I am somebody else while I am me. And I don't know if that's because I'm quantumly entangled with a homeless man or something to do with holographic consciousness. Sometimes I feel like a very conscious person, whatever that means. It might mean higher on the scale of consciousness by Dr. David Hawkins. He talks about how one person at a certain level balances out 10,000 at a certain level below. And in a way, I think we're almost like additive in a way. So say there's 10 people of 10 consciousness, that equals to one person at 1,000 consciousness, just in this example. In a way, those 10 people are that one person at the higher consciousness. It's almost like if we're thinking about it in terms of just additive consciousness and not in terms of bodies, those 10 consciousnesses that add up to make that one consciousness in effect are equal. So it's like one person. Sometimes I feel like that's partly how this quantum entanglement or holographic consciousness, akathisia, reaction, dissociation happens. In that, if the one consciousness at 1,000 or whatever divides in a way, then it sort of feels like it's somebody else, because there is somebody else at that level. So when the consciousness goes to that level, it can almost have an akathisia reaction equating with that consciousness as opposed to the higher level of consciousness. It could also have something to do with being called to do something in particular. Like I feel called to help homeless people, and then when I go into that state of consciousness, I feel like I am homeless, and maybe that's why I feel called to help them. So it could be giving me a clue, it could be an actual happening, it could be synesthesia. I think I might have just said akathisia, which is different. So synesthesia to me shows that consciousness is holographic and it's also non-local. So that would mean that our consciousness, how it is now, is affecting the whole. It has an effect on the whole. It could be partly too, if a consciousness experiences being a homeless person, that's going to give that consciousness more empathy for that situation, for that experience in humanity. So one will be more understanding and empathetic, and then not be judgmental and all that energy that goes along with that. So there's a lot of different levels I can see there. I was also thinking that I might be having an akathisia reaction to this job. I've had akathisia before when I'm put on long-term antipsychotics, and feels sort of the same. I wrote down that we choose things that won't satisfy us and are not right for us because of marketing. So marketing changes our focus and our attention onto something else because we've been programmed that way. So normal life is like this grand marketing scheme to keep us away from our natural, innate flowering that would be an unfolding, and we would be satisfied because we would be who we are and not searching for something else. And I think whatever we're searching for we'll find, but we've been programmed into searching for the wrong things. And more on the algorithm of synchronicity, which is something I will be exploring for sure. It has something to do with the present moment and with not seeking. And it's sort of a movement of the present moment as eternity, whereas thought is sort of a movement of the brain cells, which tries to give some sort of representation of what's going on. But it's not quite that. It's a movement away from actuality. In a way, it's sort of like a reflex away from what's actually right now. And the ego is like a muscle spasm that doesn't actually contribute to forward propulsion, to the movement forward. I was thinking about how this self-dialogue process is kind of like sweating when we exercise. And what I mean by that is when we exercise, we sweat, and that helps to eliminate toxins. And in a way, when we do this self-dialogue process, it's sort of like a sweating. We release mist through our mouth, and the mystery is revealed. And that energy goes out with the water, partly, as well as the energy. Just like the energy of physical movement creates the sweat, which releases the toxins. The energy of the movement of one's voice and dialogue and moving that energy through the body releases whatever toxins that need to be released through the voice, through the lungs sweating. And the algorithm of the ego voice talking to itself in loops is tied into the dopamine reflex. So that algorithm is a program that will get us addicted to the dopamine reflex, which is the ego, which is programming, which is a false structure. So we're lost in ego-centeredness, which is, since the voice is going in a loop, it creates this center, it creates this structure through which the voice circles around in a way, and it makes it feel like this me, and then this me needs pleasures, so it goes to this thought, and this thought, and this thought, and this thought, and it's constantly enclosing itself in this radius. And I don't feel we would need to be supported in recovery from mental illness if we were never pushed away from our original childlike trajectory of who we were born as. And I think this trans consciousness experience, as well as other experiences of consciousness, are actually immunity to being turned into artificial intelligent bio-robots. And it seems we buy reality with what we pay attention to. And it's not just pay attention as in focus, it's pay with our attention. Instead of paying with our attention, can we create with our intention and attention? And I think in map consciousness, the transformation moves us towards quantum computation, because dopamine is a linear computation reflex between good, bad, positive, negative. And when one gets beyond that duality, there's a much more rich experience. There's a different algorithm. And I wrote down that action in the moment heals the implications. Meaning, if a person sees something and all of its implications in the extrapolation and then actually acts, it sort of heals that in the moment, plus all of the implications of that one saw. It's really interesting. And mania is a word for a bunch of fun, cool, different, new stuff happening. And I wonder if we can just do that. Do fun, new, different, cool stuff. And do we need that energy in order to do that? We didn't when we were young. I realized about Tom Wooten's Bipolar in Order, how he teaches us to find the value in depression, which is a way of saying take the good and bad out of it, take the right and wrong, take the pleasure, take the dopamine out of it. In that we think, well, this doesn't feel good, so it's bad. But doesn't necessarily mean it's bad just because it doesn't feel good. Could have something to do with dopamine withdrawal. Depression might. And we might need to decouple from that before we get reattached to the other reward system, which isn't tied to dopamine and the personal gains and personal pleasures. It's tied to oxytocin and the gain of the whole, the gain of we. And I think that's important. And that's tied into altruism. And it's the natural reward. And depression is also showing that the ego compass of dopamine isn't it. It doesn't lead us to sustained happiness with life. It's more and more isolating, which actually leads us to be less and less happy. So it's also showing that we've gone too far down that road. And laughter is a different reward system. That gives us oxytocin as well. I actually thought of an idea for an app or something tied into the Apple Watch or something, if they could actually measure how much we laugh in a day. Apparently a 40-year-old laughs 4 times. Laughter is very healing and it's very good for the body. So it could actually be a measure of health to measure how much one laughs in one day. I was also thinking that it's probably one of the reasons why farts sound so funny is because they make us laugh. I think farting might actually be more to do with social bonding than anything else. It gets rid of gas in the body too, but evolution could have made it silent. It could have made it never make a funny sound, because it would make sense that it stay silent, because if we think about back to predatory days, if somebody farted, then they might get eaten by a lion or something. But the social benefits actually outweighed the costs of getting caught by a tiger just to make a really funny sound on purpose and laugh about it. And also, like, why is it so funny to see somebody get so offended by a smelly fart? So some people let smelly ones out on purpose just to see somebody react. And then that is funny, even if it doesn't make a sound. So I think the bacteria in our guts are on our side when it creates that. And we notice motion and contrast, and dopamine is our main motion and contrast of like, dislike, good, bad, yes, no, and that's very binary and it misses everything else because it's always judging and relating to whether it likes or dislikes something, which gives somebody dopamine. So this ego judging process and processing everything according to itself and what it thinks is the dopamine reflex. It's like these thoughts are just dopamine. Yes, yay, no, ooh, yes. And that's all it is all day long, just getting dopamine. And we seem to use our ego voice in our own head to block us from gesturing and receiving gestures. And what I mean by that is if we're talking and rationalizing in our mind, we block ourselves from, say, reaching out to touch someone's shoulder or smiling because we're thinking. And and all of this thinking in our voice that prevents these gestures, these natural gestures that we have, makes us more rigid into this conforming version of ourself as someone who never reaches out to touch someone's arm or won't even give someone a handshake or whatever it is. So our voice makes us more consistent as our ego self and blocks gestures and blocks our degrees of freedom. And it blocks us from looking to gesture, which activates other people's mirror neurons, which causes bonding and oxytocin. We're so busy judging that we're not gesturing. And in school, we're trained to be rewarded for remembering. So I think this has been internalized in the ego process, in that we're always remembering, recalling old memories, and we're getting a reward of dopamine. So we've mirrored that on the inside. So we mistake remembering for intelligence. So then we have this ego always remembering things, and the ego thinks it's this intelligent entity. And the epigestures of the universe in manic consciousness come in to seed new neural pathways and neural realities. And I think language has replaced unconditional love, because language is judgmental, it's judging all the time. And so children that develop supposedly normally, they get words early on, and then they're looking to words to judge whether they're loved in a way, and then so words replace unconditional love. And that's the process we've used, but that doesn't work with children on the autism spectrum. They need unconditional love a lot longer, because it can't be replaced, it can't be contingent on the words. It seems that learning creates DNA. And maybe that's how organisms evolved. They learned by perceiving something. They learned what it is they need to create a mirror of what it is they perceived. And the mirror isn't exactly what they perceived, but it's the complement in terms of the interface of whatever organism that is. So in a way, the organism shapes the environment shapes the organism. Perception creates DNA. The need for something creates DNA. It creates that something. So through trans-consciousness, the body, the whole organism becomes the compass instead of the ego. I've had all sorts of interesting experiences when I go into that other consciousness, and one of them was I was working at a farmer's market, and there was a vegetable vendor there who I'd known for probably 2 years or 3 years, 3 different seasons of farmers markets. And he came up to me, he sat me down, and he said to me, "Don't have any children because of the autism," or something is what he said. And he might have told me about somebody he knew with autism or something, but it was just strange. It was out of nowhere. He's never sat me down and talked to me in that way in 4 or 5 years, except for that one time. And I was in a different state of consciousness. I was more on the ecstatic, extraordinary side of things. And the person that I work with at the farmer's market was like, "What was that all about?" And so I told her, and she's like, "That is just bizarre." Because it's not like he said, "Oh, do you have children?" or whatever. He didn't ask. He's never asked. And this man, he doesn't speak English very well. He's different ethnicity. He had no reason to just sit me down like that and say that. And to me, it's sort of like in those other states of consciousness sometimes, other people are turned into messengers. And they're sitting down saying it, not as themselves. It's like, almost like they went into that other state of consciousness. And because they have a relationship, like I have a relationship with this person, I like this person, maybe I'll listen to that person. So it's kind of bizarre. And I've had more experiences like that than just that one. And so when that happened, I could think, what does this person know me, or why are they saying that? But I'm just like, wow, that was an experience of sort of messenger consciousness. I'm not sure why it happened that way, but so I guess I'm not really supposed to have children. And it seems like in that first experience, everyone was a messenger, whether I knew them or not. They were giving me messages all the time. And it became a little bit much. I wrote this long thing on something to do with burning my hand when I was straightening my hair. And I don't even remember if I talked about this already. That's the trouble. If I don't an order of stuff I wrote down, I'm like, did I talk about this or did I just write this? I have no idea. I don't know. Maybe I'll just read it because it's a bit long and I want to finish this video before I go bowling. I just extrapolated that when I was straightening my hair and burnt my hand on my hot hair, I immediately shook my hand. It was a way to disperse the concentrated heat. Waving my hand might be to cool it down. We also shake our hand if we bump it on something or get a paper cut. Is this a way to dissipate the pattern of pain? A reflex. It is a behavior that is not necessarily logical. It's biological. Do we also shake our hand so that people will notice we've been injured or hurt by way of that gesture? So if I shake my hand, somebody might look over and be like, oh, are you okay? Whereas if I don't even move, then maybe people won't notice. I extrapolate this to how some people start behaving in supposed odd behaviors in crisis. It's like a reflex to signal to others we need help. If it was logical, we would just logically and rationally ask for help. In supposed psychosis, is this kind of a reflex? We are lost in a world of words as our ego scrambles. Its gesture of inconsistent behavior, like an undulation, like the wave of a hand. It signals we've been burned by an emotion or hit by our ego, likely by being struck like a billiard ball of another ego, or burned by a gesture or action of another. This hit by action of another strikes our solid ego story structure and breaks it up. In the meantime, as we scramble to create a new story to call ourselves and calm ourselves, our behavior is different by virtue of our broken up story. As the story tries to recreate itself, it delves into past memories. If it needs more to go on, it dives into the collective storybook of the collective human unconscious. Accessing these stories is seen as delusion and hallucination when it's just trying to find material to complete the story. This is often interfered with, and the story is written over. It's put together by chemical band-aids instead of being integrated by the gentle touch of love, by a listening ear. Being cared about heals. It heals those biomolecules of distressed perception. Love cannot be replaced by pharmaceuticals. Also, I extrapolate that certain people are accumulating the allostatic load due to egocentricity. We need more world centricity. More professionals call for more professionals as the divide widens. Could TRE help shake off some of the energy instead of the behaviors? The ego is that which concentrates the energy by identifying, and this accumulates allostatic load, which must then be dissipated in behavior. So many good people doing bad things. MAP experience is to shake off all of that Not just the personal, but all the collective implied in each concentrated ego and extrapolated back to infinity. It's difficult to shake this off. Recovery is going against the universal shaking off process. It's universal distress, not just in that distress is universal, but also in that the distress of the entire universe in subtle ways added up to that moment in the time space as the individual. Accumulated inaction. When you add this up across individuals, many are ready to act out as they don't know how to act to solve this distress of the universe. How does one save the universe? One universe at a time. Universal distress is universal because we are each a universe. A verse of a song that unites us. The ego sings songs that separate us. We act in personal disorder because we are not acting in personal order. I was thinking to this training I took about how emotion can erupt into behavior. And emotion is sort of the accumulation of the allostatic load, and then eventually it can erupt into behavior. Well, this is sort of what happens with someone who goes into map consciousness. All of this behavior comes out that is a result of accumulated emotion. And I think it's not just personal emotion, because if it was just personal, it wouldn't really be enough to make that happen. What can happen is that a person gets more into hyperperception, into the highly sensitive person aspects of oneself that one was conditioned out of feeling. And when one does, all of a sudden, all the implications of all the built up emotions now are stacked up in that person's consciousness. It's not just the emotions of what one logically sort of thought was the troubles, but everything that one didn't know one was participating with actually is there. It's like the accumulated karma. It's actually going over one's life karma and past lives karma in this life now, and navigating that is resolving that karma.